More than 30 years ago, in Brazil during May of 1994, 3 days of national mourning was declared after the death of a young man taken too soon. He was remembered with people crying in public as a devout Christian who gave millions to support underprivileged children. Everywhere else in the world, though, we are familiar with this aspect of his life.
And Senna goes through. Senna goes through again.
Ayrton Senna da Silva was born on March the 21st, 1960, into a wealthy Brazilian family. He was the middle child, having an older sister and a younger brother. Nicknamed Becco by his parents, he enjoyed sports as a child. He never needed to race for money, but he fell in love with motorsport from an early age. As a kid, Senna would wake up excited to watch the Formula One highlights on television. He started driving a miniature go-kart his father gave him when he was 4 years old. Senna wasn't able to start racing go-karts until he turned 13. When he did, he got straight into one and won his first ever race. Senna would win on many more occasions during his career. He claimed the South African Karting Championship crown in 1977. After this, the teenage Senna would head to Europe, home of the biggest karting events anywhere in the world, and more success would follow. He moved into single-seaters and won titles in Formula Ford 1600, the British and European Formula Ford 2000, and British Formula 3 titles in successive seasons through the early 1980s, as well as winning the iconic Macau Grand Prix in 1983, in the first time that race was run for F3 cars. His time in the lower categories would be a sign of the way Senna would drive through his career, as Martin Brundle learned when racing Senna in F3.
Used to put us in a position that you were going to have an accident, and he would leave it up to you to decide whether to have that accident or not.
Martin experienced this psychological warfare first of all when racing against Senna in Formula 3.
Well, look, I've got a great big lead here, and he launches in from nowhere and then parks his Rolt on my shoulder. I couldn't get out of the car until they lifted his car off the top of mine.
So when he wanted to overtake, he'd go on the inside and put the car in a place. If you tried to take the corner, you're going to hit him.
Yes, he would put you in a compromising position and then leave you to make the decision. And if you didn't run into him, then psychologically you were buried and finished. He would then know that every time after that he showed you a wheel, you jump out of the way.
At any rate, it was clear from his early results that the young Brazilian was ready for the big step to F1. During 1983, Senna tested for 4 F1 teams, Williams, McLaren, Brabham and Toleman, with no opening at Williams or McLaren for 1984 and Brabham's main Italian sponsor wanting an Italian driver. Senna would join Toleman. Senna made his debut for his home race at the Brazilian Grand Prix. He qualified 17th, a mechanical problem resulting in his first race retirement on lap 8. The first great highlight of his career was in just his second race at the South African Grand Prix at Kyalami. Despite cramping his neck and shoulders, he held on for a 6th place finish and his first World Championship point. A combination of tyre and fuel pressure problem resulted in Senna failing to qualify for the San Marino Grand Prix. This would be the only time during his F1 career Senna would not qualify. Had the talent of Senna not been well known in the motorsport world to this point, that would change at the 6th race of the season, the 1984 Monaco Grand Prix. Senna qualified 13th in the Toleman. The race itself would be the first time in F1 history Senna would race in wet weather, and when it rained, Senna made it easy to spot his talents. He had a sixth sense to find the grip needed for the fastest possible lap. He hunted down and passed every car behind leader Alain Prost to get into second place and began gaining on the Frenchman, who began to complain the conditions were too bad to continue. Along the pit straight at the end of the 32nd lap, Senna passed Prost for the lead before the start-finish line, right as the red flag was shown. The red flag was shown based off the decision of clerk of the course Jackie Ickx. By rule, the positions on lap 31, at which Prost was leading, was taken. The stoppage was controversial as it benefited Prost, a more well-known and experienced driver in F1 compared to Senna, driving McLaren with a Porsche-designed engine. Ickx was the lead driver for Porsche in sports car racing. Ickx was suspended from his race control duties for not consulting with the stewards over his decision before making it. Nevertheless, the result stood. Prost had won, with Senna and Toleman forced to settle for second. Both denied a first win. But Senna would not have to wait too long. The rest of 1984 saw how remarkable that drive in Monaco was for Senna, because the Toleman was not the most reliable car during the season. The seasons back then were noticeably shorter than they are today, just the 16 Grand Prix. He raced 14 times in 1984, the San Marino Grand Prix, where he did not qualify, and the Italian Grand Prix, after he was suspended by Toleman for breach of his contract by entering into talks for Lotus for 1985 without informing the Toleman team first, were the only two races he did not compete in. Although Senna did have a £100 buyout clause in his contract, the team had to be informed before discussions with any other team started. So that's why he was not racing in Italy. Of the 14 weekends, Senna was forced to retire 8 times, but he did finish on the podium 3 times, Monaco, Britain and Portugal. Senna finished equal 9th, remarkable given how often the Toleman would conk out. Senna would indeed join Lotus for 1985. For the second straight year, Senna's car failed to finish at the opening race in his native Brazil, so he had come away with nothing to start the 1985 season before his 16th race start at the 1985 Portuguese Grand Prix. It would be fitting for Senna to win his first race in the wet after being cruelly denied at Monaco in 1984. It was Portugal 1985 when the heavens opened where Senna took the challenge. He qualified 4 tenths ahead of Alain Prost in a superior McLaren. In the race, the rain caused many problems with cars spinning out, but Senna was in another dimension. He got 13 seconds clear of second by lap 10, and at 20 laps he was 30 seconds in front. The race was scheduled for 70 laps, but the race exceeded the 2-hour time limit when Senna was given the 1 lap to go signal at the start of lap 67. The race, due to the wet conditions, had been run at a slow pace. More than a minute in front, Senna had dominated and came home for his first win in F1. Following his win in Portugal, Senna would lead at the San Marino, Monaco, British and German Grand Prix. He had a huge accident at the French Grand Prix at Paul Ricard after an engine failure. He did not finish in the points again until finishing second at the Austrian Grand Prix. Senna added the second victory of his career in wet and dry conditions at Spa. Despite many issues with reliability, Senna and his team mate DeAngelis finished 4th and 5th in the standings. Senna's qualifying talent was clear to see, having the most pole positions for the season with 7. DeAngelis was replaced at Lotus by Johnny Dumfries after Senna vetoed Derek Warwick, believing that Lotus could not run 2 competitive cars for 2 top drivers at the same time. Senna started the season with a second in Brazil behind Nelson Piquet before fending off Piquet's teammate Nigel Mansell in the Spanish Grand Prix in the closing laps. With Mansell chasing hard on newer tyres, Senna just held on by 0.014 seconds in one of the closest finishes in F1 history. Senna was leading the World Championship at this point, but like years gone by, the Lotus still had plenty of reliability issues. But it was quick. Senna won 8 poles with a further 6 podium finishes, including another win at the Detroit Grand Prix, finishing 4th in the drivers' standings with 55 points. After winning the Detroit Grand Prix from Frenchman Prost and Jacques Lafitte, which took place one day after Brazil was eliminated from the 1986 FIFA World Cup by France, Senna asked a trackside supporter for the Brazilian flag, and he drove 1 lap waving it. Thereafter, he repeated this every time he won a race. Lotus had a new engine deal for 1987 with Honda, and with them came a new teammate for Senna, 34-year-old Japanese driver Satoru Nakajima. Senna started the season with mixed fortunes. A podium at the San Marino Grand Prix was followed by a controversial race at Spa where he collided with Mansell, and afterwards in the pits Mansell grabbed Senna by the throat and had to be restrained by Lotus mechanics. Senna then won 2 races in a row, the Monaco Grand Prix for the first time and Detroit. The Williams cars had a clear advantage over the rest of the field, the gap most obvious at the British Grand Prix where Mansell and Piquet and the superior Williams lapped every other team, including Senna and Nakajima, who finished 3rd and 4th respectively. Senna became dissatisfied with his chances at Lotus, and at Monza it was announced he'd be joining McLaren for 1988. He finished strongly, finishing 2nd in the final 2 races in Japan and Australia, but post-race in Australia it was found the brake ducts of his Lotus were wider than permitted, and Senna was disqualified, concluding his time with Lotus. In the World Championship standings, Senna finished 3rd with 57 points, 6 podium finishes, but only 1 pole position this season. So Senna's time in F1 had plenty of great moments so far. He clearly had the ability to become world champ, but he needed a car with the quickness of the Lotus, but with better reliability. Not only would he get that in his first season with McLaren, they had secured Honda to supply V6 turbo engines for 1988. Everything would come together for Senna. In 1988, he would get behind the wheel of one of the greatest F1 cars of all time, the McLaren MP44. The 1988 season did not get off to the best start for Senna. He wasn't able to change gears on the parade lap of the very first race of the season, having to complete the lap jammed in first gear. The first start was aborted and Senna started in the spare car from the pits, but he was eventually disqualified for changing cars after the green flag had been shown following the parade lap, a move that was not allowed. But he won the following race at Imola, with Prost coming home second. It was the first of 10 McLaren 1-2s for the 1988 season. At the 1988 Monaco Grand Prix, Senna was in another dimension qualifying. He went around the Monaco track in 1 minute 23.998 seconds, 1.427 seconds to the better of Alain Prost. Senna said of the lap, "I was no longer driving the car consciously. I was driving it by instinct only. I was in a different dimension. I was way over the limit, but still able to find even more. It frightens me, because I realised I was well beyond my conscious understanding." In the race, he was dominant, every corner taken perfectly, not a single mistake made.
Looks as though he is going to
until
finish in the points for arrows for the second time. And that is Senna! Sensation! On lap 67, Ayrton Senna goes out of the lead of the Monaco Grand Prix at the Portier. For the second time this year, Brazilian Ayrton Senna is out of a race. He failed in Brazil when he was excluded, having fought his way up to second place. He won at Imola for the San Marino Grand Prix, and now he's lost a win here at Monaco.
Senna had binned it at Portier. He was so upset with himself he did not walk back to the pits, but rather back to his apartment. Television cameras did not capture the crash, so we don't know for sure what happened, but Prost speculated that Senna clipped the inside barrier, sending him into the outside barrier. After trailing Prost home in Mexico, Senna recorded wins at the Canadian and Detroit Grand Prix. Prost got the better in France, but Senna would go on to win the next 4 races on the spin. At the Italian Grand Prix, Prost had issues with his engine, forcing him to retire, before with 2 laps left, Senna looked to lap the Williams of Jean-Louis Chesler. Chesler locked up and slid into the gravel trap. Chesler kept the car from going straight on and attempted to join the track, but Senna, not expecting Chesler to regain his car control so quickly, took the corner normally, was struck by the Williams, breaking the McLaren suspension and ending the perfect season for McLaren. Nevertheless, the MP44 would win every single other race in that season, but the tension between the teammates was really beginning to boil. At the Portuguese Grand Prix, Prost responded and went to pass Senna at the end of the first lap. Senna swerved to block Prost, forcing the Frenchman to nearly run into the pit wall. Prost would edge Senna into the first corner. Prost was not happy with Senna's actions. He did apologise for his part to Prost after the race. So together, Prost and Senna won 15 of the 16 races in 1988, and it was Senna who became world champion at Suzuka. After a poor start from pole, where he dropped to 14th, in 20 laps, Senna got himself back to second and made the move past Prost and would go on to win the World Championship for the first time in his career, as the winner of 8 races to Prost, who had 7. From 1950 to 1990, not every point scoring performance would necessarily be counted. Only the best a driver had over a season would count to your overall World Championship standings. Under the modern system, where every score counts, Prost would have been World Champion in 1988, having scored more points over the season, but 3 of his second places were not counted for, as only the 11 best scores counted, meaning that Senna had beaten Prost by 3 points in the standings. 1989 was a controversial season. The controversies began at Imola. Senna passed Prost en route to victory, with Prost claiming that violated a pre-race agreement, and Senna saying no such agreement was ever made. Senna claimed additional wins in Monaco, Germany, Belgium and Spain, but unlike the MP44, the MP45 was a more unreliable car, and Senna had issues in Phoenix, Canada, France, Britain and Italy. This meant that with 2 races left, Senna had to win the last 2 remaining races to overcome Prost's lead in the championship. The last race in those days were held in Australia, but before then the F1 circus went to Japan. The 1989 Japanese Grand Prix is among the most controversial races in motorsport history. Senna claimed pole position but was jumped by Prost at the start. Senna was hunting him down. He had to get past somehow, some way. Lap after lap, the Brazilian was chasing the Frenchman down. Senna caught Prost on lap 40 and the gap there between them stood at around 1 second. On lap 47, Senna was as close as he had ever been and came out of 130R. He was within 2 car lengths. This was it. Senna went for the move.
This is the opportunity that Senna's looking for, and he's going through. Ouch! Oh my goodness, this is fantastic. They meet. This is what we were fearing might happen during the race.
The two World Championship contenders had collided together. Prost quickly got out of his car, believing that, with both cars out, he would be world champion. But Senna urged the marshals to give his car a push. Senna was able to restart his engine, make his way through the chicane bollards to rejoin the race. Senna had to do an entire lap with a broken nose cone, and despite the slow in-lap and pit stop, he would rejoin the race just 5 seconds behind the new race leader, Alessandro Nandini. Senna got past Nandini at the same chicane where he collided with Prost and got to the checkered flag to seemingly keep his championship hopes alive. But after the race, Senna was disqualified by the stewards for missing the chicane following his collision with Prost. Senna and McLaren attempted to appeal the disqualification, but when the matter was heard at a FISA hearing in Paris, Senna's disqualification was both upheld, in addition to a $100,000 fine and suspended 6-month ban being imposed on the driver, with FISA labelling Senna as a dangerous driver. Nandini was the winner of the race for the first and only time in his career. Prost was world champion. The disqualification did not actually single-handedly change the result of the World Championship, as Senna failed to finish in the final race in Adelaide, Australia, having needed to win it to win the championship had he won in Japan. The disqualification remains controversial, though, and added to the Prost-Senna rivalry, which only saw them as teammates for 2 seasons at McLaren, as Prost headed over to Ferrari for 1990. The 1990 season began with Senna being joined by Austrian Gerhard Berger at McLaren, and the season was once again a fight between Senna and Prost. One of Senna's best performances occurred in the opening round of the 1990 season at the United States Grand Prix on the streets of Phoenix. Having only qualified 5th, Senna would work his way to 2nd after many retirements among front runners, chasing down the Tyrrell of John Lacey. On lap 35, Senna went for the move and overtook Lacey, who immediately took the position back at the next corner. On the next lap, Senna made the move and this time made it stick and would come away with the win, Lacey finishing a very impressive 2nd place. In Germany, Senna fought Benetton driver Alessandro Nannini throughout the race and came home with the win. Senna would dominate yet again at Monaco, but as the season progressed, Prost in the Ferrari began to get the better and take up the fight to Senna with 5 wins compared to 6 for Senna after the third to last race. That race was held in Spain, where Prost and teammate Nigel Mansell finished 1-2. Senna, for his part, had retired earlier in the race with a damaged radiator, and the result resulted in the gap between Senna and Prost coming to 9 points, with 2 races left. The shoe was on the other foot compared to last season. This time, if Prost failed to finish, Senna would become world champion. Once again, the championship went to Suzuka for the 1990 Japanese Grand Prix. Senna would take pole position in qualifying, but he was not happy with the situation. You see, most racetracks have their pole sitter start on the cleaner racing side of the track, on the outside of the track, but that was not the case here. Senna argued that the pole position grid box should be moved away from the dirty side. He was supported by Berger, who qualified 4th, and as a result was on the cleaner side of the track, and after much debate with the steward, Senna would be forced to line up on the dirty side of the track. Senna knew that if Prost failed to finish, he would be world champion, so Senna made sure Prost didn't finish.
And Senna sprints away, but Alain Prost takes the lead. It's happened. Alain Prost has taken the advantage. Senna is trying to go through on the inside, and it's happened immediately. This is amazing. Senna goes off at the first corner, but what has happened to Prost? He has gone off too. Well, that is amazing, but I fear absolutely predictable.
Yes, and that makes Ayrton Senna world champion this year.
When they're back there, Senna, if he wanted to stay in the race, you'd have seen 2 puffs of blue smoke from his front tyres, where that gap was always going to disappear. He was driving into a disappearing wedge.
After the collision, Senna talked about the crash in a press conference, using words that have since become immortal in motorsport circles, undoubtedly used in many online lobbies in the years since.
When there is a gap, you either commit yourself as a professional racing driver that is designed to win races, or you come second, or you come third, or you come fifth. And I'm not designed to come third, fourth, or fifth. I race to win. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
At any rate, Senna had become world champion for the second time. Senna's career had experienced many highs, but there was still one thing missing for him, a victory at his home Grand Prix in Brazil. After winning in Phoenix to begin the season, he would get that chance in the second race of the season. Yet another pole position would give him that chance. He got away with a great start and gained an early lead. After a round of pit stops though, the chasing Williams of Mansell looked like he was going to catch Senna, but he had to pit on lap 50 of the 71 lap race due to a tyre puncture. But Senna had issues of his own, as his gearbox lost fourth gear as Mansell began to close, setting a new fastest lap on lap 60. When it was Mansell's gearbox that failed, resulting in a spin that led to his retirement, that would not be the end of Senna's worries. In fact, they got worse. He now lost third and fifth gear, meaning he had to take every corner around Interlagos in sixth gear, trying to limp his car home for his first win on home soil, with Mansell's teammate Riccardo Patrese beginning to eat into the margin. In case Senna had anything else to worry about, it began to drizzle with rain. Senna held his nerve over the last few laps and got across the line 2.9 seconds ahead of Patrese. Over the team radio, he seemed happy with the outcome. Senna was physically and emotionally drained. He had suffered from muscle cramps trying to keep the car in sixth gear. He had to be helped from his car to get onto the podium. On the podium, Senna's exhaustion was there for the world to see, but he was just barely able to lift the winner's trophy. Finally, a Brazilian Grand Prix winner. This all just the second race of the new season. Senna would win the first four races. No team was able to match the wins he was getting, or the reliability of the McLaren, despite improvements from Williams late in the season. Williams was McLaren's biggest championship challenger at the time. 1991 saw the famous side-by-side battle between Senna and Mansell in Spain. Though Senna's consistency, the car competitiveness, and the Williams' unreliability at the beginning of the season gave him an early advantage, Senna insisted that Honda step up their engine development program and demanded further improvements to the MP46 before it was too late. These modifications included modifications introduced at Hungary and at Belgium, which enabled him to make a late season push. And he won 3 more races to secure the championship, which was settled in Japan when Mansell, who needed to win, went off at the first corner while running third and beat his Williams in the gravel track. Senna finished second, handing the victory to teammate Gerhard Berger at the last corner as a thank you gesture for his support over the season. Senna was planning to move to Williams for 1992, but Honda's CEO, Nobuhiko Kawamoto, personally requested that he remained at McLaren Honda, which Senna did out of a sense of loyalty, and he would remain there for the 1992 season, now a 3-time champion of the world. In 1992, Senna's determination to win was not going to be matched as McLaren's inability to challenge the dominant Williams FW14B. Senna would still have one brilliant moment at the 1992 Monaco Grand Prix. Mansell looked to pull away early in that race, but he had to come into the pits due to a loose wheel nut, resulting in Senna's McLaren taking the lead. Mansell, on fresh tyres, set a lap record almost 2 laps quicker than Senna's and closed the gap to right behind the McLaren in just 2 laps. In the last 3 laps, Mansell tried everything except driving over Senna's car to get past, but on the iconically tight streets of Monaco, Senna kept Mansell at bay, who never really looked like he was going to be able to overtake. It was Senna's 5th Monaco Grand Prix victory, equaling Mr. Monaco, Graham Hill's record, in addition to it being his 4th in a row. The rest of the season never panned out well for Senna, as the Williams was very dominant that year. Senna had just 3 wins in 1992 and finished a mere 4th in the standings. But there was one moment during that season that showed the type of person Senna was. During Friday practice for the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, Ligier driver Eric Comas had a big accident, and Senna immediately jumped out of his car and ran across the live racetrack, risking his own life to help.
You see, that's the paradox of Ayrton Senna, isn't it? In that he was clearly a fantastic human being. and he cared about people in Brazil, he cared about racing drivers, but then he would crash Alain Prost off the racetrack and put both their lives at risk.
There were rumours that Senna could leave McLaren or look to race at the Indianapolis 500, but the team were able to keep Senna with them and in F1 for 1993. The third race of the 1993 season will be the only one in F1 history to be held at Donington Park, and Senna qualified 4th, but his inferior McLaren was crowded out at the start and dropped to 5th, before producing one of the greatest laps of all time.
Prost leads, Hill second, Wendlinger is third, and Ayrton Senna is up to 4th position ahead of Schumacher and challenging Wendlinger as they go round the right-hander into the old hairpin. Senna is up to 3rd.
And after being crowded at the start, a quite brilliant couple of corners by Ayrton Senna. Tremendous stuff. He muscled his way back into the contention at Redgate. He's going inside Damon Hill. And Senna into 2nd place already. And he's giving it absolutely everything in the wet part of the race.
So 2 retirements already, Michael Andretti and Carl Wendlinger, and Senna goes through into the lead. He's passed Alain Prost, so the McLaren leads, Prost 2nd, Hill is 3rd.
The lap
Take
of
an
gods
enormous
had
amount
taken
of
Senna
time
from 5th to 3rd,
because
but it
he
was
is
arguably
well
the best
ahead,
lap Senna
of
had in
course,
that
of
race.
the second
At the
place
end of lap
man.
56,
He's going
Senna
on to
came
wet
into the
tyres.
pits, but his pit crew was not there, so he was forced to carry on and raced hard to get back to the pit after having initially slowed down, expecting to stop. As a result of this, combined with the lack of a pit lane speed limit in those days, and the fact the unique pit lane at Donington bypassed the last hairpin, lap 58 for Senna was the fastest of anyone in that race, en route to a great win for Senna in changing conditions. He had done the same thing in Brazil and would go on to win the Monaco Grand Prix for a record 6th time, and found himself leading the championship at this point. The rest of the season did not pan out well for Senna, forced to retire with mechanical failures in Imola, Canada, Britain, Hungary and Portugal. Senna would win the last couple of races in Japan and Australia, the last couple of times he would win a race or even stand on the podium. Prost had come out of retirement in 1993 with Williams, but with Prost out of the picture for 1994, Senna would join Williams and would be partnered with Damon Hill, son of Graham. The first 2 races at the Brazilian and Pacific Grand Prix showed promise as Senna took pole but failed to finish on both occasions. The pressure for both drivers and team was there as F1 arrived for what would turn out to be its weekend from hell, the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix at Imola.
Do you fear mortality?
Don't you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I do too. Very much.
Is it something that's on your mind?
It's all the time in my mind because I'm very aware of the dangers that we are exposed to doing our activity, being racing driver. The fact that you are aware of it, it is important because it determines certain limits which you are prepared to go to and not exceed. And in that respect, it determines then like a self-preservation feeling that you have towards your activity.
So there's so far that you would go.
For sure.
There is not much more that can be said that has not already been said regarding the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, but it's going to be discussed anyway. Senna had failed to finish for the first couple of races with the Williams teams and arrived at Imola, a track he had great success at in the past, looking to turn things around. The first sign that this race weekend would be remembered infamously was Ruben Barrichello's big crash in practice, which he was able to walk away from with just a broken nose. In qualifying, Ronald Ratzenberger crashed at the Villeneuve curve, slamming into the wall, the wreckage travelling 300 yards to the Tosa corner. It is believed that despite desperate attempts by the medical team to revive Ratzenberger, the initial impact may have broken his neck. The death of the Austrian Ratzenberger was the first in F1 since the 1982 Canadian Grand Prix. The session was red flagged but resumed 48 minutes later. Many teams, including Senna's Williams, did not compete, but as a result of the time he set in the first session, Senna qualified on pole. As he got into his car, he unknowingly to anyone else took an Austrian flag into the cockpit. At a crazy start, JJ Leto's car stalled and was collided into by an unsighted Pedro Lamy. The safety car rather than the red flag was called for, and after 4 laps behind the safety car, the field went racing again. The first lap after the safety car would be the last full lap of Senna's career. At exactly 2:17 p.m. local time, on the start of lap 7 as TV viewers watched from the onboard camera of Michael Schumacher's Benetton. Senna arrived at Tamburello. Senna's Williams simply didn't make the corner.
Michael Schumacher now, and Senna! My goodness! I just saw him plunge off to the right, and Senna has joined Pedro Lamy and JJ Letter in a shattered motor car. You can see the debris on the right. What on earth happened there? I don't know. Whether it was a sudden loss of downforce for some reason, but Senna is still in the car.
Upon seeing Senna's head move, many viewers would have seen that as a positive, but thousands of miles away in Argentina, 5-time F1 world champion, the 82-year-old Juan Manuel Fangio saw that and recognised it as a sign of a massive head injury. He switched off his television and said later, "I knew he was dead." The race was immediately stopped, but due to an apparent breakdown in communication, that message did not make its way to the LaRose team, leading to one of their cars hurtling towards the incident at full speed. The driver of the car, Eric Comas, the man Senna risked his own life to save, now watching and wanting to do the same to him, but there was nothing he could do.
Arrive à Tamburello, il y avait déjà l'hélicoptère médical, l'ambulance, la voiture d'Ayrton, et Ayrton qui était déjà sur une civière à côté de sa voiture, et donc j'ai immobilisé ma monoplace.
Vous êtes retrouvé avec votre voiture en face de l'hélicoptère sur le circuit.
Je me suis retrouvé au milieu de la piste à quelques mètres du drame. J'ai compris en arrivant, il y avait un message, c'était assez... je crois que Ayrton avait quelqu'un qui dégageait tellement d'ondes, on va dire. Et là, c'était une bombe atomique qui venait d'exploser dans Tamburello. Il y avait vraiment une atmosphère lourde, et sans voir les détails, je savais que c'était très très grave. Et surtout, il y a une paralysie qui s'est installée chez moi parce que je me retrouvais à côté de l'homme qui 2 ans avant m'avait sauvé la vie sans rien pouvoir faire, et ça c'était terrible parce que lui il m'a sauvé la vie et moi bon, je suis arrivé trop tard, je suis pas médecin, je suis pas réanimateur, et puis de toute façon son état était déjà l'accident était différent du mien, mais bon, je me suis retrouvé là impuissant à ses côtés, et ça a été une épreuve terrible dont j'arrive à parler simplement 10 ans après, que depuis quelques mois, et qui m'a que j'ai gardé en moi très 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 longtemps.
At 2:55 p.m, 37 minutes after Senna's crash, the race was restarted. 5 minutes later, the helicopter carrying Senna arrived at hospital. Doctors took him straight to intensive care for a brain scan. At 3:10 p.m, his heart stopped again. The doctors were able to restart before putting him in a clean room on a life support machine. In Brazil, the streets of major cities were quiet on that Sunday morning as the whole country woke up. They became fixated with what they saw on their television screens. The race finally ended at 4:20 p.m. with no more major further incidents. Michael Schumacher won the race, but that was not what was important. At 4:30 p.m, Dr. Fayandri read out a clinical bulletin. She said Ayrton Senna had brain damage with a hemorrhage shock and was in a deep coma. She told reporters there would be another bulletin at 6 o'clock. At 6:05 p.m, she told reporters that Senna was clinically dead. He was still connected, she said, to the equipment maintaining his heartbeat. That news led early evening news programmes. In Britain, an hour behind Europe, the news bulletins waited for a more final verdict. A priest arrived to the hospital and went into Senna's room at 6:15 p.m. and gave him the last rites. At 6:37 p.m, Senna's heart stopped again, and the decision was made not to try and restart it. Keeping a man who was effectively dead artificially alive was ethically doubtful. Enough was enough. At 6:40 p.m, Ayrton Senna, the 3-time F1 world champion and 41-time F1 Grand Prix race winner, was pronounced dead. But the official time of death would be 2:17 p.m, when he had impacted with the wall and his brain had stopped working. At the hospital, nurses discovered a small, furled Austrian flag hidden in the sleeve of Senna's race overalls. Journalists concluded, had Senna won, he had intended to fly it from his cockpit on the parade lap and onto the podium and dedicate what would have been his 42nd Grand Prix victory to the memory of the late Roland Ratzenberger. F1 has never been the same again. As a result of many safety changes were required, resulting in a lot of familiar circuits looking a bit different in 1994. But it was the right thing to do. F1 had seemingly come a long way safety-wise in 1994 without a death in more than a decade, it seemed like there was nothing to be concerned about, but 2 deaths in 2 days opened the eyes of the motorsport community to ensure safety for drivers, and that has worked. Only Jules Bianchi at the 2014 Japanese Grand Prix has died in F1 practice qualifying or race sessions since, and there is always room for improvement. The halo was controversial when it came in, but Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen are definitely grateful for it. Senna's career only lasted 10 seasons, and yet his memorable moments outnumber almost any other driver. He won 41 races, which a dominant driver can do today in about 2 seasons. Such has been the increase in the number of races in an F1 season, but he did have a lot of reliability issues throughout his career. He really only had 4 full seasons in a championship caliber car, 1988 to 1991 with McLaren, and he was in the hunt in all of those seasons. He won 68 pole positions, including a string of 8 in a row. Many racetracks dedicate corners after Senna, and many people, including some of the best F1 drivers, when asked who was the best F1 driver, all give the same answer.
I think Senna, I will put him in number 1.
For me, Senna is number 1.
For me, he was number 1.
I will put Ayrton Senna as number 1.
For me, Ayrton Senna undoubtedly was the number 1.
I would put him number 1. You know, he was definitely the greatest driver.
If you ask me, I put Senna as well in number 1.
It is hard to say where Senna truly sits with certainty. He's such a figure of the 80s and 90s, and yet had he lived, he could have stayed in F1 until the 21st century, and likely would have remained in the public eye for the remainder of his life. Damon Hill came within 1 point of Michael Schumacher for the 1994 World Championship. The death of Senna turned F1 to the playground of Michael Schumacher, who would dominate the sport in the decade after Senna's death. We never got to see much of Schumacher versus Senna, and with the Williams being the team for most of the 90s, it is not inconceivable that had Senna lived, he could have won a 4th World Championship and breached 50 Grand Prix victories. But that's all hypothetical. Sadly, we will never truly know. Unquestionably, Senna cemented his legacy very early on as a fastidious man who worked on details to improve the car and better himself. He made sure every time he got into a car, he would not leave the car without any reservations or regrets. He put everything on the line. Sometimes he went over the top, and that style wouldn't really work in the modern day, but it showed who Senna truly was. The competitive man with a big heart, the devout Catholic who risked his own well-being on the racetrack, one of the greatest racing drivers to ever get behind the wheel.